I'd like to clarify my position on gold for both my longer-term subscribers, but especially for my newer subscribers. I get lots of questions and comments regarding the price action in dollars in the recent past or predictions of the price action in dollars in the near-term future. This implies that there is an easy and reliable way to predict the gold price. While I do think that over the span of 5 or more years, there are tools that can be used to more or less make accurately reasonable predictions, I think that such efforts are dangerous because they can lead us to believe that there are times when we should not hold any gold at all. It's akin to thinking that because you're a good driver, you shouldn't carry auto insurance. Honestly, I think if we in this community are to do ourselves a service, it will be to understand how the truly wealthy of the world view this metal. Sure, there are wealthy people who speculate in gold, but the truly wealthy don't own it because they think that it will double in price next year. They own it because they acknowledge to themselves the fact that the financial world may go to hell at some unknown and unknowable point in the future. It has happened repeatedly in the past, often enough that any reasonable person should be concerned. In such times, gold has always transported the wealth of the wealthy families across the abyss, and I'm sure that they would much rather hold 100% of their wealth in income-producing assets, but to do so would be to risk possible ruin. Let's start this video by examining a couple key figures published in the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, which was published this month. It shows how all of the world's wealth is distributed. This will give us some clues as to how much wealth you need to store in gold in order for it to serve as your wealth insurance. Here's their wealth pyramid. The information content of this figure is pretty dense, so you may have to pause this video periodically or watch it more than once to digest all of the facts and figures. On the left-hand side of the pyramid are various wealth brackets. We have a very large group of people at the bottom with less than $10,000 worth of total wealth each. This bracket contains 2.879 billion people out of a total world adult population of 5.23 billion adults. So this bracket is 55% of the total adult world population. On the right-hand side of the pyramid is listed the total wealth contained within this bracket. This population of people, who each hold less than $10,000 worth of wealth, hold a total of $5.5 trillion amongst all of them. Credit Suisse's estimate of total world wealth is $418 trillion, and so this $5.5 trillion represents 1.3% of the total. Think about that for a minute. 55% of the world's population own less than $10,000 worth of wealth, which is only 1.3% of the total world wealth. So if you have more than $10,000, you are better off than more than half of the world's population in terms of total wealth. Moving up to the next bracket, we have the $10,000 to $100,000 per adult wealth bracket. Within this bracket, we have 1.7 billion people, which represents 32.8% of the world's adult population. This bracket contains $57.3 trillion worth of assets of the $418 trillion total world wealth, or 13.7% of it. This bracket is not terribly interesting when taken by itself, but it becomes very interesting when combined with the bottom bracket. When we add up the population numbers, we can see that 88% of the world's population has less than $100,000 worth of wealth each, and only 15% of the world's wealth. Think about that for a minute. 88% of the world's population has only 15% of the world's wealth. That means that 12% of the world's population holds 85% of its wealth. But wait, it gets better. Moving up to the $100,000 to $1 million bracket, we see that 11.1% of the adult population fall into this range. There is $164 trillion worth of wealth in this bracket, which is about 39% of the world total. Again, taken by itself, this is not too interesting. But when we combine the bottom three brackets, that is, those with less than $1 million each, we see that 99% of the world's population commands about half of the world's wealth, while the top 1% of the population, those with more than $1 million of wealth each, commands the other half of the world's wealth. I'm not making this statement to foment class hatred. I'm making this statement to make a point. Do you think these people at the top are concerned about the possibility of losing their wealth and moving down the pyramid? Think about that for a moment. Now let's see how the wealth is broken down for the top 1%. It's pretty interesting. Here's another figure put out by Credit Suisse showing the breakdown of the top 1%. Notice that the vast majority of these people have between $1 to $5 million each. Fewer still have between $5 to $10 million each. Only about half of 1% of the total world's population have more than $10 million each. As we approach the top of the pyramid, those who have more than $50 million each, we see that there is a scant number in this bracket. It may seem that 215,000 people is a large number of individuals, but on the global scale, it constitutes only 0.004% of the total. This is the group who is probably the most concerned about losing their wealth. This is probably the group who is most willing to sacrifice some of their income earning potential to hold some gold for purposes of wealth security. But how much gold would they need to own for this purpose? How much gold is necessary to protect wealth? This is an important question and can serve as a guide for you to determine for yourself how much you desire to hold, regardless of its price. Let's explore this by going back to the overview of all of the brackets. What I'm about to do is to show you how the gold would be distributed if everyone in the world desired to have the same amount of gold in proportion to their total net wealth. By my estimates, using world gold production figures dating back for more than a century, there have been 6 billion ounces of gold mined. While a small fraction of this gold has been used in unrecoverable applications, and some of it was lost, I'm guessing that nearly all of it exists in vaults and upon the necks and wrists of those who value it as jewelry. 6 billion ounces of gold spread out amongst 5.23 billion adults would suggest that there is a little bit more than 1 ounce of gold for each adult. Can each adult afford an ounce of gold? Hardly, but we'll get to that in a minute. If we consider that the total wealth of the world is estimated to be $418 trillion, we can quickly calculate that this means that there's about $70,000 worth of wealth for every ounce of gold. If everyone were to hold the same amount of gold in proportion to their total wealth as wealth insurance, this is how much gold each person would need to hold. That's it. At current market prices, it's only about 2.5%. And that's not much gold at all. That's the power of gold. It takes very little to protect a lot. That's what the very wealthy of the world know. That's why they're willing to sacrifice some of their potential income to protect the whole lot. If the price of gold falls to half of its current value tomorrow, do you think they're going to care? Absolutely not. Such a price move would have a negligible impact on their total net wealth. Do you think if the price of gold doubled tomorrow, they'd rush out to lock in a profit? Again, the answer is no. Let's see what the gold holdings of each population would look like if gold was distributed according to net wealth. In the lowest bracket, we'd have very little gold per individual. It would work out to be less than 1/10 of an ounce per adult. And this is surprisingly little. As we move up the second bracket, those who have between $10,000 and $100,000 of wealth, each adult we see would hold about half an ounce of gold apiece. Again, surprisingly little. So 88% of the world's population would hold half an ounce of gold or less, probably much less. That leaves the vast majority of gold to be concentrated in the hands of the few at the top. The $100,000 to $1 million bracket would hold on average about 4 ounces of gold per adult. This bears some commenting on my part. Do I think that there's that much gold in this bracket? My best guess is no. From what I can tell, most of the people who have less than $1 million worth of gold of wealth, less than $1 million worth of wealth each, actually do not value gold all that much. They don't really understand it. They are taught by the media and by the schools that gold has no purpose. My best guess is that this bracket doesn't really care that much about gold. But they do tend to become interested when gold rises in price. I'm guessing that this is the bracket that's responsible for much of the speculative movements in the gold price. These are the weak hands that chase the price. They don't hold gold for its insurance properties or wealth storage properties. Most of them gamble in gold. That's just my opinion, and I could be way off on that belief. But then there are those at the top, those who hold more than $1 million worth of wealth. For this bracket, we'd have on average 56 ounces of gold apiece. And Most of them would have much less than this because, as we saw on the previous slide, the bulk of the wealth in this range is concentrated in very few hands. So there you have it. This is what the gold wealth distribution would look like if it was allocated equally by net worth. Again, if it were allocated evenly, it would be about 1 ounce of gold for every $70,000 worth of wealth. At current prices, this would be about 2.5%. It's not much, but this should be your starting point. I personally believe that a person should hold at least some gold regardless of price. You don't really need that much. 2.5% is a pretty good level to hold just for protection purposes. But here's an interesting point that I'd like to make. At some point in the future, there is bound to be another crisis of confidence that would result in a large revaluation of gold relative to other assets. It happened in the late 1970s, and it almost happened in 2011. Because gold is so inexpensive, it could be a good way to profit from such an event. Increasing your gold holdings beyond 2.5% is a good way to accomplish this. If you want a possible financial calamity to catapult you up to the top 1% of the pyramid, you might consider owning 14 ounces of gold. How do I calculate that number? Simply, if there is 1 ounce of gold for every $70,000 of wealth, then there will be 14 ounces of gold for every $1 million in wealth. How much is 14 ounces of gold at current market prices? It's about $25,000. So for $25,000, you could buy yourself a lottery ticket to catapult yourself up to the top 1%. And if the lottery ticket doesn't pay off in your lifetime, well, unlike other lottery tickets that don't pay, this lottery ticket will have considerable resale value. Think about it. Gold. Get you some.